How's it going, guys? Louis Skupien here today with something a bit different today. So a couple of weeks ago I heard about this thing called generational trauma. It was on a podcast, Wiz's podcast, the Max Afterburner podcast, featuring Mark Keller, who was one of my previous guests on the Talk 4 podcast. You know, without going into it too much, when I was listening to this and listening to Mark's story and his experience and stuff, there was kind of like alarm bells ringing in my head and everything just kind of clicked into place. So it really woke me up to kind of a few things, and I thought I just have to have Slider back on for another little talk about this to share his story so you guys get to hear it too, and maybe some of you are going to get the exact same reaction I did and just think, wow, okay. I think everyone really can improve from this perspective, and there's something to be said for all of us about feeling this kind of a way and just feeling like you're not good enough for. Now, don't get me wrong, Mark's experience came from going on the medicine and finding that out in this way, but I think everyone, if you do a bit of self-reflection, we can all benefit from this and this talk and start to open our eyes up to what's actually going on and why we feel the way we do. So without further ado, guys, please do like, subscribe and leave a comment with what you thought. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this, and yeah, stay safe and enjoy the show.
So, to kick us off then, can you briefly explain what is generational trauma and how does it affect people and families? After that, we'll get into kind of your experiences with it, but just tell us what that is exactly to start with.
You know, one of the insights I got from my first medicine experience was all about generational trauma. You know, it wasn't a classroom thing. It was something I lived. I just had, you know, one of the many insights that I had brought me an understanding of what that is and the understanding that I had been living with it. And I think more importantly, the understanding that I could do something about it and break the chain. What is the chain? You know, each of us you know, comes into the world and we have the experiences that we have, and we develop our ego. You know, and the ego is a set of beliefs, ideas, self-talk, you know, the things that go on in our head while we go through our life. And they largely serve the purpose of protecting us from discomfort, making us, you know, making life easier. Seems to be the goal of the ego. And because of that, the ego isn't always honest with you. You know, it isn't always giving you what you need to be your best self, to be your happiest, to be most fulfilled. And, you know, we go on through our lives and we deal with stress and the job and the family and everything, health, everything we have to do. But those experiences really shape who we are. And sometimes that's not healthy. And when that happens, you know, oftentimes when you become a parent, those things manifest in your behavior, the way you interact with your children, and they learn lessons that you learned from your experiences. And it happens without the parent realizing they're passing it on to the child. It happens without the child realizing where it came from. And because of that, you often create a chain where, you know, the parts of the ego that are a response to some traumatic event that the parent had end up getting passed along to the kid. And this can go on for generations, you know, often many, many generations. You know, and the reason I know something about it, like I said, is I realized that, you know, my father had passed some things along to me, and I was passing them along to my sons. And for at least one of my sons, my younger son, Jackson, this was a really bad thing. It hurt our relationship, and I don't think it was giving him what he needed from his father or to be on the best trajectory to be a healthy and happy adult. You know, I'm fortunate that I know this sounds backwards. I went through some really awful stuff that brought me to the point where I had to go, you know, through the psychedelic-assisted therapy to break out of my cycles. And, you know, I learned something about myself, my father, our relationships, and how I was passing that along to my son. And, you know, once I had that understanding, it was very easy for me to go to him and begin doing the work required to break that cycle of generational trauma.
Tell us a bit about the personal side of it that you experienced. And so kind of listening to the podcast with Wiz, you sort of explained how you tried to almost do the opposite, but then found that it actually had happened and you hadn't even realized it. So for the second part of this, just tell us a bit about kind of your generational trauma that you went through, and how did it affect you, the family, and tell us, how did the medicine change that, and how did you realize what had happened?
Right. Yeah. So, my father, like I said, he's 90 years old. He grew up in that post-depression, period, World War II. He served in the military in Korea. So, generationally, his generation is very different from my generation. He grew up relatively poor. I know they lived in a tent for some time, and when they had a house, it was fairly humble. And he was there with his mom and dad. My dad's the oldest child. He had a brother right behind him, and then two sisters right behind him. So it was 4 kids, 2 parents, and I don't know a whole lot about what the environment was like in that house. My father doesn't talk about it. That's a generational thing to some extent. But we've pieced together stories from my aunts and uncles, and my uncle's wife has been particularly helpful. My mom knew some stuff and all this, but we came to understand that some really traumatic stuff happened to my dad as a young teenager. So, I'll leave the gory details out because that'll make this long. But he came home one day and caught his mother in a very compromising situation with another man. He was coming home from school, and there they were in the car, and I think he was 12, 13 years old, and he happened upon them, and obviously this was shocking to him. I don't know that he reported this to his dad or anything like that, but what I do know is when my dad came home from school the next day, his mother and his sisters were gone, with no indication of where they'd gone. His mom just took his sisters and left. So,
right.
My dad ended up, trying to hunt them down without the benefit of the internet or even Yellow Pages. I think at that time, somehow my dad, after some months, hunted his sisters and his mom down, and he went to this house where she was living with presumably the same man. It's been my assumption. He knocked on the door, and the man answered the door and said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm Ken Keller." And the guy had never heard of him. And he said, "Well, I'm here for my sisters." And he named the sisters, and this confused the guy because he didn't know anything about a brother. And his mom came to the door and pretended she didn't know him.
Oh my God.
Completely disowned him right there to his face. You want to talk about a traumatic event for a young boy. It's just absolutely brutal. So, going forward, my dad's dad, my grandfather, was I think the head baker at Nabisco for Ritz crackers. He was the king of the Ritz crackers. So he had all these cool recipes, like 700 pounds of flour, 300 eggs, stuff like that. And he was a hardworking guy, and he just worked and worked and worked. He wasn't around much. So my dad ended up raising his siblings to some extent. He stepped up and had to be the responsible adult on scene, and that's a lot for a young guy. And I also have this, generationally, and people just worked really hard back then. They raised chickens and sold them by the side of the road to feed themselves, make money to live.
Yeah.
He was just a real hardworking guy. His dad valued that hard work ethic, and he always had that. And then when his mom and sisters were gone, there was even more put on his shoulders. And, of necessity, my father became very tough, both physically and emotionally. And again, this is another generational thing. He built a wall around himself emotionally. I'm sure he's a sensitive guy in there somewhere, but you don't get to see it with my dad. That stuff is just buried way in there. And again, I talked about the ego earlier. He developed the defenses he needed to, to get through his life and do what he needed to do. How did that manifest in my life? So here's the passing of the baton here. Here's how the generational trauma comes along. So my dad did very well for himself. He was in the United States Navy, again, during the Korean War. He was an electronics technician. He got out. He went to Rutgers University, got a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, and then a master's degree in solid state physics. And he went on to do great things. He was very successful, in his career and financially. And, we grew up fairly comfortably and all that. But what never was left behind was my dad's idea, this thing he had learned, that life is brutal, that you have to be tough. You have to work your ass off all the time. You've got to be emotionally tough. You can't let your emotions have a lot to do with the way you make decisions or the way you operate in your life. And, my father loves me. I'm his eldest son, younger brother. My dad loves him too. There's no doubt in my mind. But my dad was very, very hard on us. And as a kid, you're just not calibrated on that. But as an adult, looking back and after conversations with my mom and stuff, I understand that, as the oldest son, my dad wasn't calibrated on what's appropriate to expect from a young boy. And I think what happened is, he was trying to do the best job he could as a father. That was, he's loving me. He tried very, very hard to make sure that I was tough enough, that I was strong enough to survive this hard life. And as a result, these expectations were placed on me that weren't really appropriate for my age. And what I heard as a young boy was that I wasn't good enough. He was, he had always had these demands on me, and I never felt like I could live up to them. I got chewed out a lot. I was punished. I was given chores that just weren't age appropriate. All kinds of stuff. I don't want to sound like a whiny little cunt here, but I did the best I could, and I didn't hate my dad for it. But what happened was I internalized this idea that, I wasn't good enough, that no matter how hard I tried, I just wasn't quite there. That's not the message he meant to send at all, but it's the message I received and internalized. And what's interesting is, I never thought that up here. It really went into my subconscious and just kind of sat there and became very much at the foundation of who I am. That served me extremely well through a lot of my life because, academically, I set very high goals for myself, and most of them I managed to achieve. And I did a lot of great things. I'm an electrical engineer. I flew F-14s and spent 20 years in the Navy, combat, and all that stuff we've talked about in our previous session. But, when you pile all the things that happened to me in combat, it's all the service-related stuff, and then some other events that happened in my life. All this stuff kind of added up, and it was all kind of on top of that idea that I'm not good enough, that I have to do these extraordinary things to be worthy of love. Yeah, is really what it was. So, the way that started to manifest in my life and with my children was not clear to me until we were very, very far down the road. It's only a couple of years ago that I recognized all this. But, my older son, I was pretty hard on him. Certainly not as hard as my dad was on me. But I expected a lot from him. He's a very stoic kid. He's an old soul. We used to joke that he was 25 years old when he was born. He's, kind of introverted, very hardworking guy, self-motivating. We always said he was the wind-up toy that wound his own key. He would just go. So we didn't really get to see. I think he did just fine. I think he did just fine. And he also understood more than his younger brother, what I was going through, combat connected trauma and all that stuff. My younger son is very different. And it's amazing how, the same genetic source can produce another human being that's just completely different. And that's certainly the case with my boys. Son number 2, Jackson, is a very sensitive guy. He's a feeler. He's more, at least outwardly, more of a feeler than Max is. He's more sensitive. And that's a two-way thing, what he feels and the way he acts towards people too. He's a very thoughtful, kind. He's just a great human being. He's a good kid. And he went through some of his own stuff there for a couple of years. His first couple of years of high school, in particular, he had some challenging things happen to him. He had a friend who committed suicide. There was a divorce that I went through, and there was some other stuff. Just life happening to him. But he got into a place where he didn't feel good about himself for a couple of years. And as a result of that, we saw a brilliant kid who, wouldn't follow the rules, he did a lot of coloring outside the lines, wouldn't stay in bounds. He self-sabotaged to some extent in academics. The kid's absolutely brilliant. And just watch him, get bad grades because he refuses to turn in his homework. I mean, I can't tell you how many teachers I spoke to who said, "Oh, he's doing great on the tests." His Spanish teacher said, "He's nearly fluent. He just doesn't turn in his homework." So we're watching him do all this stuff to himself. And as a parent, that was unbelievably frustrating. So, I knew how to dial up the heat the way my dad dialed up the heat. We started punishing him and restricting him and taking things away. And sadly, I probably raised my voice to him sometimes when I shouldn't have. It's not because I don't love him. It's because I was afraid he wasn't going to be set up to succeed as an adult. I very much understand as a parent, it's not your job to be, or it shouldn't be your objective to be liked by your kids. It should be your objective to make sure that they're well prepared for what's ahead of them. So, for a couple of years, and again, I was going through a lot of stuff myself. I mean, my anxiety, my anger, PTSD, exacerbated by acute withdrawal from benzodiazepines and all that stuff. I mean, it was just a mess. So, I didn't give up. I kept trying really hard, but it got to the point where I barely had a relationship with him. He just didn't want to have any meaningful conversations. It was harder and harder to get him to spend time with me. It was very heartbreaking for me. I was frustrated. I didn't know what to do differently. And neither did his mom. We tried, and of course, a mom's approach is different. But we just couldn't figure it out. This was a source of tremendous frustration for me and a source of some fear. I was worried that my son, wasn't going to be on the best trajectory as an adult if that continued. So, that particular thing isn't something I was looking to address or looking for answers for when I went to my first medicine experience. But lo and behold, the medicine gives you what you need. People in that field always talk about, you come in there with your intentions, you come in there with the questions you want to ask, the things you're looking for answers for. And sometimes you get those, sometimes you don't. It seems that almost always you get what you need, though. And some folks impart some intelligence to the medicine. The medicine knows, and it's going to give you what you need. I understand that. I think what's really going on is somewhere in your own mind, you do know what's wrong. You're not honest with yourself, or you can't see yourself clearly because of the ego. You build up these defense mechanisms and these beliefs and all this self-talk, and scramble that up some more with. I had some tragedy in combat. My issues with the benzodiazepines
It piles.
All this other stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a lot of stuff. There was no way I was going to see this on my own. During the experience with the Ibogaine, which was the plant medicine that we used in my experiences, very, very powerful entheogen. It really opens up your mind so it talks to itself. That may sound like a strange thing. If you look at, Dr. Robin Carhart Harris did this white paper called the entropic brain theory. If you're interested in psychedelic medicine, everyone should look at that. It shows how, different functional sections of your brain tend to communicate internally a lot, and they intercommunicate a little, on a neurological level. And he's mapped all this stuff out. But when you use these powerful psychedelics, what happens is that crosstalk, those pathways where different regions of your brain are talking to one another, are wide open. And so every part of your brain has access to every other part of your brain. This is why you have hallucinations. Your visual cortex is connected to all kinds of inputs that it doesn't usually get. And so it tries to make sense of those. And it renders visions.
Yeah.
And that's really helpful. I certainly have a fairly spectacular story about the visions on my first Ibogaine experience. It's a little bit unusual for Ibogaine therapy. I was very lucky. I got the full IMAX. But the effects of this, of the Ibogaine, the noribogaine, the primary metabolite, hangs around for a very long time. And so, having opened up your mind, having kind of reset your default mode network, it's kind of like these experiences are like a big reset button for your self-talk, and I had all that. And in the days that followed that experience, I just had many, many, many aha moments, many insights into myself, my life, the errors in the way that I looked at things and thought about things, the things I told myself, all that. And there was just dozens of big insights. And one of them was about my son Jackson and my relationship with him. And it literally, I was sitting in the courtyard with a couple other guys who'd been through the session, the medicine experience the night before. And, it was one of the best days of my life when we all sat there and joked and shared our stories and talked about the insights that we had. And one of them just hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was this. That was the moment when I realized what I had heard from my father. The message he was sending me was, Mark, you have to be strong. You have to be tough. You've got to work your tail off. You got to do. It's all good advice. But, those were the messages he was trying to send to me. But what I heard and internalized was that I'm not good enough. And that was very, very much a part of me. And I came to understand that how much of my life that was driving and how damaging it actually was to me to have that belief in my subconscious. As a matter of fact, the vision that I had that's specific to this topic we're talking about was an elephant. And I envisioned myself as an ant, trying to walk north, churning my 6 little legs, and north I go. And, I know that north is goodness and happiness and well-being. And the whole time, 54 years of my life at that point, I had no idea that I was on the back of a southbound elephant. That elephant was my subconscious, these beliefs I had about my own worth, right? So hop off the elephant, bro, But here's the really great part, and this is how this relates to generational trauma. My father had passed this along to me, and it had, in many ways, adversely affected my life and kind of set me up for some of the difficulties that I went through. But in a flash of light, I realized I was doing the same thing to my son Jackson. I realized that, whatever it was I had been doing to try to get him to straighten up and do what I thought he needed to do, it wasn't working. And I kept trying over and over again the same thing, and it just wasn't working. And I just realized I received this harmful message from my father that he never meant to send, and I was doing the same thing to my son. I was setting him up to end up, some of the places that I ended up, or at least I was hurting his chances of avoiding it. And I felt awful. I mean, it was beautiful that suddenly became clear to me, but that I had been doing it was awful. I just wanted to run to him. Of course, I'm down in Mexico at this point. He's in Virginia.
Yeah.
But, I realized that he was probably receiving the wrong message. And this beautiful young man, I'm getting all choked up. He's a great guy. He's sweet and sensitive and big-hearted and intelligent. He's an incredible athlete. He's doing great things in every domain. He's a great guy. I've never thought otherwise of him. But I realized I was hurting him. And that's not what a father's supposed to do. So, a few days later, I got back to Virginia Beach, and, I just couldn't wait to see my son Jackson, because I wanted to just tell him what happened. And so what I did when I got back, first thing I did, he was over at his mom's house. So I went over to his mom's house, and, I went in, I think his brother answered the door, and I said, "Hey, where's Jackson?" And, I went back to Jackson's room, and I knocked on his door, and Jackson came out, and I said, "Hey, buddy." And he said, "Hi, Dad." And I said, "Jackson, I need to ask you to do something for me. I think this is pretty important." He said, for 60 seconds, will you just do something for me for 60 seconds? I said, "Sure, what is it?" And so I took my watch and I set my timer, and I said, "Come in and give me a hug." So Jackson came in. He's a big guy too. He's 6'5", 200 pounds. I'm like,
Blimey.
big boy. But he comes in, so I give him this hug. And, at first it was I joke about, good game, bro. It was one of those hugs, but that's not what I was after. I pulled him in tight, and I gave him a good squeeze, and I put my head up against his. And I'm going to start crying talking about it because it's such an emotional moment. But I grabbed it and I really hugged him for real. And remember, I'm only a few days out from the Ibogaine. I'm still, my heart's very open. I'm very, tuned in right now and all this stuff. And I just went to him and I hugged him, Louis. I hugged him. And after a little bit, maybe 30 seconds, I don't know, he started to relax. And I could just feel his muscles relaxing. And he started hugging me back. And it was really beautiful. Like, I connected with him in a way that, and we're a pretty affectionate family. I like hugs and touching and stuff, but I had never hugged him like this. And what was funny is apparently I set my alarm for 10 minutes instead of 1 minute. After about 3 minutes, I was like, "This seems like a long time." And I kind of backed up and looked at him, and he went, "That was a really long time." I'm like, "Yeah, we're good, bro." So, high five. But then I said to him, "Did you hear me?" I said, "Did you hear what I was trying to tell you?" And he said, "Yeah, I did." He did. And what I was trying to tell him was that I love him. And so we went and sat down, and I told him the same story I just told you in some more detail about, what I had learned from my dad and how I carried that along without knowing it, and how I was concerned that I was passing it along to him. And I just told him that I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to do that. And, to some extent, he acknowledged that is what was happening. And I told him, "Jackson, you can do no wrong." I said, "There's nothing you can do that is going to cause your father or your mother to not love you." I said, "I hope you don't turn into Jeffrey Dahmer. That would be challenging, but we love you. You are us, And I said, the things I've complained about, the things where you've probably heard that I feel you've fallen short. I said, those things don't matter that much. What matters is that I love you. And you're going to be okay. You are okay. And our relationship is really important to me." He heard me. That wasn't a magic bullet. That was a lot for a what was he, 16 at the time? That's a lot to throw at a kid.
Yeah.
Especially when you've kind of been the tough dad who's hard to reach a little bit. He's the sensitive guy. But here's what I can tell you. We have a wonderful relationship now. I mean, that was, about 2 years ago that we had that conversation. And, it's been some work to reconnect. But I think we're really there. It's great. I drove him. We were in the car for 2 hours the other day. I was bringing him home from a lacrosse game, and we had a wonderful conversation. I mean, he was very candid with me about what's going on in his life and his feelings, and that wouldn't have happened before the medicine. So my hope is that maybe I can swipe that elephant out from underneath him if it's there, and let him march on in the direction he wants to march on without that working against him. I hope that's what I've achieved, and that is breaking the chain of generational trauma.
That is
something I didn't really know about or understand at all.
Yeah, me neither.
Prior to a medicine experience, it taught me everything I needed to know.
The way you came to realize this, obviously, like you said, was from the experience on the psychedelics and the medicine. So there's a lot of people and a lot of parents out there who are not going to be doing that or going through that experience. So if you are a parent who's kind of listening to this, then for my third question, how can parents recognize their own generational trauma and get onto the path of fixing things, perhaps without having to go on the medicine?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question, isn't it? It's a very good question, an important question, and I think one every parent should ask themselves. Again, I'm not a formally trained clinician, although I have some interest in becoming one. So I don't know what the off-the-shelf answer is, but as a father and another human being who's I guess had some minor success with this, the first thing is, if something you're doing in your child rearing isn't working, then you have to do something else. And that is not a profound statement as a logical construct, but as a human being who's just, getting through life the best they can, I think that's an important thing. I mean, just don't keep beating your head against the wall. You got to figure out what's going on. And I think the first step in that, and, certainly something I didn't do well, I'll call myself guilty on this. Got to listen. It's really important to get your relationship with your children to a point where they are comfortable talking to you about everything. Ideally, I'm probably never going to get there, but they need to know that they're not going to be judged or told they're a screw up or, get a lot of negative feedback for being honest. You want to try to teach your children to strive for, self-insight. And to do that, you've got to teach yourself to do that as well. And I think that's how you identify, what are the things in my childhood? Look for the fallacies. What are the things that I believe or I feel or that I tell myself that just aren't true? And a lot of that is falls into what people call self-love. You got to love yourself. It's very hard to love anyone else if you don't love yourself. And, I don't care who you are. I don't care what your situation is, what your experiences have been, what poor choices you've made. It doesn't matter. You are worthy of love. I mean, you are a soul. You are a human being. There is forgiveness for your mistakes. You need to forgive yourself. And we don't have to go into, theological sides or the spiritual side of this, but too much. But, I believe our Creator loves us unconditionally, and there's always forgiveness. So, if there's forgiveness on an eternal scale, then grow up and forgive yourself. Forgive yourself. Stop making the same mistakes over and over again, because that's dumb. But at some point, you got to go, you know what, this isn't working. I've got to do something else. Forgive yourself for being wrong. You're a human being. Of course, you're going to be wrong. And when you start recognizing that, I think it'll, in yourself, that it'll be easier to kind of interface with your children and help them develop those skills too, which inoculates them against parents screwing them up. Which, by the way, one of the favorite things my mom has ever said, and she's an angel on earth, she said, Mark, every parent screws their kids up. She said, but we're still here. She said, I'm still here. I mean, she's 83 years old. She's like, I'm helping to unscrew you. You know? And we had a good laugh about it. And I said, yeah, you're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable. All right? You forgive yourself, and you all grow together as a family. And that's how you fix it.
Absolutely, so true. Really, really good points there. It's very powerful. But let's flip the positions here then. So obviously that's for parents, but if you're a kid who listens to this and this all really resonates with you, and you're in a situation where you have parents or a parent who is unwilling to change or accept any criticism, how can these kids work on themselves to prevent generational trauma and work towards breaking through all those layers for their future generations?
Wow, that's a great question. And if I can answer it well, and anyone's listening who's in that situation, that would do a lot of good. Again, I'm not a formally trained clinician. I have been a kid, though. So that's a tough thing, because, your parents are superheroes when you're a kid. I know my folks were. My dad is certainly the smartest and most powerful, capable guy I knew as a kid, and I kind of worshipped him. So when you're not getting what you need from someone like that, that's tough. That can be frustrating. And yeah, as a kid, you don't really have all the tools that you have after you've survived some beatings that life always gives you growing up. I think as a kid, the first thing you have to do is recognize that you're not getting what you need. That's an important thing. If you're a kid and you can say, I really want my parents or my father or my mother to understand this about me, and they don't, and I'm frustrated by that. Well, that's a huge first step. And then you can, say to yourself, well, how do I fix this? I think the first thing would be to just go to your parent and say, Mom or Dad, I love you. I know you love me. But I'm struggling with some stuff, and I hope you'll listen to me. And be kind, but be brutally honest with your parents. Tell them what you think, what you feel. Don't accuse them of anything. If a kid comes to his parents and says, you don't love me, or you're mean, or you're too hard on me, don't say that, but go in and say, when you do this, what I hear is this, and that makes me feel this way. Right? That's called relational interaction, right? Louis, when I hear you say, Slider, it's great to see you again, what I hear is that you're glad we're having a conversation now. And I feel happy about that, right? So that's a little 3-step thing. So, you can go to your parents and say, Dad, all my friends are playing baseball today. And you're telling me that, I'm not allowed to go if I don't pick up all the apples that dropped off the apple tree, right? That was one of my big chores. We had zillions of apple trees. I used to get mad about that. I never once went to my dad and said, Dad, I hear you telling me I have to pick up the apples or I can't play baseball. And what I hear is that it's not important for me to interact with my friends and have this activity. And I'm really sad about that, because it doesn't feel fair to me. Can I go play baseball first, and then I'll come back and do the apples? Maybe that's a lame example, but it's not deeply emotional. But, just that relational interaction, I think, is important. When you say this, I hear that, and here's how I feel about it. That's very disarming, I think. Now, there's going to be times when your parents, for whatever reason, are going through what they're going through. Maybe they're disconnected. Maybe they're unable to hear that and interact with you to solve whatever you've brought up. That sometimes that's how it is. Maybe your parent's an alcoholic. Maybe their boss is abusive at work and you don't ever see it, and they come home all pissed off. You just don't know as a kid. Sometimes, maybe you turn to your friends. Maybe you seek out, an adult that you respect. Something I've done for many years now is, I'm a coach. I coach youth and high school sports and stuff like that. I've been surprised by how many kids have reached out to me at times about a personal issue. And I always, you don't want to get between a kid and their parent, but I always try to listen and give them something. And sometimes people just need to be heard. Sometimes that's enough. So I would encourage, any young person who's listening to this, if you're struggling, if you feel like you're not being heard, find an adult you respect. Be careful about airing details of family issues, but go to them and tell them what you need or what you're feeling. Ask for help. Certainly if you're, religious, if you go to church or something, church leaders or people you meet in that environment who are concerned with, personal growth and wellness and all that, those are people to reach out to. And the biggest thing, and this is hard depending on what age you are, how mature you are, but just understand that your parents are human. They're not perfect. They may not be able to hear you. You may not get what you need. And that's not a reason to lash out at them or to self-destruct. It's just what it is. And this is I think it takes some maturity to get there, but just to understand that life is hard and, you're worthy of love no matter what. Even some pretty bad people are worthy of love on some level. And just know that about yourself and just try to breathe and look for things that make you happy. Do the things that make you happy.
So guys, that was the episode with Mark Slider Keller. He's a fantastic guy. I love Mark. He's really good. Like I said, his experience did come from being on the medicine, but you guys can all self-reflect and find these things that are happening and start to work on them and get better. Obviously, like I said at the beginning, please do subscribe, leave a like and leave a comment, and do message me as well, because honestly, I loved this talk. It was really interesting for me, and there's a lot of things that kind of woke up almost from like listening to it on this podcast and the previous podcast. Like I said, Max Afterburner. So please guys, send me a message and let me know what you thought about it, what your reaction was, and how you think you can improve from this kind of a thing too. If you haven't seen it already, please do go and check out the first episode I had with Mark Keller. It was absolutely fantastic, and do go and leave him a follow. He's a great guy, honestly. And the No Fallen Heroes Foundation too. He's doing great work on No Fallen Heroes Foundation. Please do subscribe and donate to them and just do all these great things to help support an organisation that's doing fantastic things for the world and for the people. Guys, this has been a different kind of episode, but I'm glad to have branched out a little bit and sharing this story with you. So guys, please, like I said, do subscribe and have a fantastic day, stay safe, and see you in the next episode.